Hi, I'm Amy Porter, and this is my podcast. My mission is to show people how to empower themselves through music, business, and media. I try to see as clearly as possible how I can help. I showcase the music that I've played and the people I've met along the way. I'm a wife and a stepmom. You might know me as a professor, a performer, a producer, a publisher, a recording artist. I'm the founder of a couple of nonprofits. Welcome in to my PorterFlute Pod. Welcome to PorterFlute Pod. It's episode 12, so I think I'll call it a season right here until next time, and I can't think of a better season finale. 9 months ago, in May 2022, the music world lost a musician's musician. William Ingham Brooke Bennett, WIBB, was born on the 7th of February, 1936, and he died on the 12th of May, 2022. In honor of what would have been his 87th birthday on February 7th, I'm recording this tribute to WIBB for the American listeners and those around the world who need to know about this sound and artistry that we hear in soundtracks of films and classical music streaming services, often not realizing that it's WIBB. I didn't even really know him as my teacher. It was the fact I was raised by an English mother meant he sort of got me, and he even accepted me as an honorary Brit. I asked WIBB, who taught in London, to show up for me in Atlanta, since I was the program chair for the 1999 convention for the NFA, and he did. Well, we will have stories, and they are shared by the incomparable Lorna McGhee, who I interviewed, and then you'll also hear from Denis Bouriakov, Wissam Boustany, Emily Beynon, Joel C., and Jeffery Zook. And of course, the music you're listening to is WIBB. Thanks for being in PorterFlute Pod. I'm so happy you're here. I'd like to begin by reading from the obituary written in The Guardian so beautifully by June Emerson the week that WIBB died. Shortly after returning to Britain in 1958 from studying in Paris, the flautist WIlliam Bennett received a phone call. "Get to the festival hall as quick as you can. Sir Thomas Beecham is doing Richard Strauss's Ein Heldenleben and is a player short. The rehearsal has already started." This was soon followed by another call telling him to present himself in Manchester for an audition with the BBC Northern Symphony Orchestra, now the BBC Philharmonic. 5 days later, Bennett was a member of that orchestra and embarking on a career as one of the leading players of his generation, both through influencing the development and design of the flute and making more than 100 recordings as a soloist, many of them on his own Beep Records label. He sought to give his instrument, quote, the depth, dignity, and grandeur of the voice, or a string instrument, end quote. In 1960, he went to the Sadler's Wells Orchestra for a year, and then he became principal flute of the London Symphony Orchestra from 1966 to 1972. Then he went to the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, but was soon fired for playing truant in order to do a world tour with the English Chamber Orchestra. This did not trouble him greatly, as he enjoyed the freelancing life and never became a full-time member of that orchestra again. In addition to the English Chamber Orchestra, he freelanced with the London Mozart Players and the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields and the Pro Arte Orchestra. There was plenty of chamber music in the Madelon Trio with the oboist Philip Jones and pianist Susan Bradshaw, and the Lyric Trio with the cellist Margaret Moncrief and pianist Margaret Norman. As a recitalist, he traveled the world, often with pianist Clifford Benson. With the harpsichordist George Malcolm, he made the first British recording of the complete Bach flute sonatas, and they joined the violinist Yehudi Menuhin in recording Bach's Triple Concerto in A minor. With Ossian Ellis, he recorded the Concerto for Flute and Harp by Mozart and much else. He also appeared with the larger chamber groups, among them the Melos Ensemble and Nash Ensemble. Several solo works were written for him, including winter music by Richard Rodney Bennett and concertos by Diana Burrell, William Matthias, and the Venezuelan composer Raimundo Pineda. Composers for his trios included Matthias, Jean-Michel Damas, Peter Racine Fricker, and Cyril Scott. To extend the repertoire, Bennett did, quote, tons of pinching from works for violin, including the entire Beethoven concerto and several Mozart violin concertos and sonatas. He unashamedly included these arrangements in his recitals and acknowledged how much he had learned from the playing of violinists such as Fritz Kreisler and Adolf Busch. Bennett also did commercial sessions. On one occasion, a group of people he had not met before, quote, shambled in, bringing all sorts of instruments. One had a sack of bells from a junk shop. None of them could read music. There was an Indian sitar player, so I went home and got my Indian flute to play along with him. A figure with an afro haircut, red silk waistcoat, and yellow silk trousers shouted across, "Give Flutie a mic, will ya?" He said my playing was real groovy and we were gonna go for the take. After it was all over, I was told that this was Jimi Hendrix. Born in London, William was the son of Faith and Frank Bennett, both architects, and acquired the nickname of WIBB from the acronym of his names. At the age of 7, he was sent to Beltane School, a, quote, progressive establishment that was evacuated to Wiltshire during the Second World War. While there, William bought a plastic flageolet from nearby Melksham, and by bedtime could play Clementine. He acquired a plastic recorder, which he would play along with a gramophone. This was his first contact with the problems of pitch. When he slowed the gramophone down to learn the difficult parts, the pitch dropped. This early experience led eventually to his rebuilding and retuning his flutes in later life. Soon after this, he heard a recording of a real flute and felt that this was something far better than the recorder, so when he was 12, his mother bought him a thick wooden Rudal cart instrument. By the end of the first day, he was playing Bach's Sheep May Safely Graze. And at the end of 6 months, Bach sonatas, and Rimsky-Korsakov's Flight of the Bumblebee, largely self-taught. At the age of 15, he was accepted for lessons by Geoffrey Gilbert, who loaded his pupils with a large quantity of scales and technical exercises, all of which he expected to be played through each day. The following year, 1952, Bennett entered the Guildhall School of Music in London. When the time came for national service in 1954, he joined the Scots Guard band, but still managed to continue his studies with Gilbert. The 3 years in the band were an invaluable experience. New music appeared daily, often having to be transposed at sight, and under the fearsome conductor, Sam Rhodes. No allowances were made. The repertoire was wide, and performing on bandstands without rehearsal was, quote, hell at first, but a fantastic experience in retrospect, end quote, making him an excellent sight reader. In 1957, Bennett went to study with Fernand Cartier in Paris. He kept a notebook with 2 columns. On the left side, Cartier says this, and on the right, Gilbert says this. The right side usually won. While there, he was deeply inspired by hearing the playing of Fernand Dufresne, and he had a few lessons with another admirer of Dufresne, Jean-Pierre Rampal. The latter proved to be a big influence on Bennett's phrasing. He believed in the necessity of developing a singing tone and of being lighthearted and happy about playing the flute, an attitude that Bennett shared. Of a later period of study with another French flautist, Marcel Moïse, in Switzerland and France from 1965 onwards, Bennett said that the experience was like, quote, having lessons from God, end quote. Bennett's interest in pitch and tuning, which continued at school with his making of a flute from an old bicycle pump, led to the construction of several other instruments, including a balalaika and a guitar. When he acquired a Morley flute, he began carving at the holes and moving the tone holes in order to get it to play in tune. He then rebuilt an old Rudolph card flute onto a new silver tube and making it as near to the scale of a Powell flute as possible. He showed it to his teacher, and after a few adjustments, Gilbert pronounced it better in tune than a real Powell. This led to cooperation with the makers Elmer Cole and Albert Cooper, and the development of the Cooper scale and the Bennett scale. For most of his career, Bennett played a Louis Lot, the same make of instrument as played by his hero Dufresne, but tuned to his own scale. In 2012, he upgraded the Bennett scale used for altus flutes from Japan and Stephen Wessel flutes from Somerset. He ran master classes and a summer school and taught in Freiburg, Germany, and from 1986 at the Royal Academy of Music in London. In 1995, he was appointed OBE, and for those who don't know what that is, I'll interject. That stands for Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, and OBE is the second highest ranking order of the British Empire Award. WIBB continued to organize flute events until the coronavirus pandemic intervened. The thread that ran through Bennett's career was the sheer delight he took in flute playing. He is survived by his wife, Michi Komiyama. She survived him, along with their son, Timothy, his daughters, Fenora and Sophie, and grandchildren, Luke, Joe, and Naomi. And I'd like to thank June Emerson for writing this in The Guardian in the UK 5 days after WIBB died. I'm delighted I could bring it to our listeners and give your article extended life for our future flute family and future generations. Lorna McGhee, welcome to PorterFlute Pod.
Thank you, Amy. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, we're talking about William Bennett because he was a shining star. When I was around him, I felt welcome. Instead of, oh, I was never your student, it was so giving, conventions or whatever. And the older he got, he'd have all these people around him, right? And he would always just nod and know. I don't know if knowing who you are as a young person means anything, but it meant something to me,
I think you hit on something that was a really beautiful aspect about him, which was, he was a great flute player. He was a great pedagogue, but he just treated people equally.
Yeah.
He just happened to be like one of the great musicians. Well, first of all, you were not allowed to call him Mr. Bennett or Professor Bennett. It was WIBB. Everybody, no matter who you were, whether you were, a student who just met him for the first time, you were allowed to call him WIBB because that was just how he wanted to be. And it was the same for everybody. There was no strata there. And on the summer schools, he would enjoy just getting to know people. It didn't matter how well they played or where they were in the sort of pecking order of, there was no star system. And I think that's incredibly healthy and something to learn from that. It doesn't matter how you play, it matters what kind of person you are, and to treat people kindly and equally and with respect. Yeah, somehow he would see people. He was a very playful person. And if you look at photographs of Picasso as an old man, Picasso, and somehow, Picasso will be sort of leaping around his studio and very playful, and and WIBB had that too, this playful quality of, and this just wonderful playful relationship that I think great artists have. You know, they take the work seriously, but they don't take themselves too seriously. And it's I mean, that's perhaps an oversimplification, but that playfulness and that beautiful, you know, that childlike joy in what you're doing, that never left him. And so I think that, you know, when you bump up against that as a student, you know, that is quite disarming in a beautiful way. And, you know, I noticed that perhaps more as an adult, you know, than when I would teach on the summer schools and things like that. When just I observe his teaching and just see, that's really beautiful, the way just his playfulness puts people at ease. And it kind of disarms these anxieties about status or am I okay? Am I doing okay? And, you know, and then you just enter into this kind of playful artistry that is very, you know, it's very serious, but it's not, it's, you know, and it's very real and it's very valuable, but it's that way in. I just want to bring up that playfulness in his personality that would also be reflected in his wonderfully colorful clothes and bright clothes. You know, that's just kind of taking delight. And because he would take delight in what he was doing and in just his way of being, it gives permission to other people to do the same. And so then I think they're more at ease, and then you can actually get down to the real work. Like, where does this phrase go? You know, because people are not worried so much about how am I doing? Am I okay? Am I, you know, it's just, let's play together.
Was there a difference in the aspect of, well, you have an audition and therefore you should play, you know, in a certain way versus the solo repertoire, which I know he adored, the showpieces, I know. So was there a difference in his teaching? Because I remember there were definite ways here in the States of playing for an audition versus in the concert. But I imagine, let me guess, WIBB would just say music is music and be a musician. What do you think?
100% right. And I subscribe to that too. I love that about him. I must say, I don't really ever recall sort of preparing for an audition with him. You know, I'd take some excerpts to him. You know, I remember having a wonderful lesson with him on deafness. You know, I mean, there's certain lessons that really stand out in my mind as having been really incredibly inspiring. But it was actually never about executing. You know, it was all about, you know, oh, this music is incredible, you know, and listen to this and look what he does here. And, you know, so music is music. I mean, I have to say now I've been around the block a few times myself. So now I'm more aware with my own students about helping them prepare, like in the mental aspect of, especially of preparing for auditions. But I don't ask them to play differently in an audition. I'm definitely more conscious than he was about helping them prepare for the ordeal of it, you know, or the pressures of it, and just how to navigate and how to handle that way. And when we just muddled along.
Did he teach the piccolo, or did you play the piccolo for him at all?
I don't remember that. I bought one of his piccolos. I've got his lovely old Haynes piccolo that I think he recorded the Vivaldi piccolo concertos on. No, I don't recall ever having a lesson on the piccolo with him. And you know, he was so interested in the tuning, in the intonation and the scale of flutes. You know, he was so really into that one of the things he had a hard time with the Baroque flute, just because as an instrument it's so out of tune itself. But you know, these were some of his great interests, you know, the scale of the flute. And I mean, he was a great piccolo player. I think he just picked it up and played it. I think he just had a great ear, and you know, he would put his putty in the holes and just try and improve the tuning. I mean, my little Haynes piccolo still got his putty in the holes. And
Hello, Amy. Thank you so much for inviting me to contribute to your terrific podcast. I'm hugely honoured. My name is Emily Beynon, and I shall be forever grateful for the 4 wonderful years that I spent studying with William Bennett, or WIBB as he liked to be called, at the Royal Academy of Music in London. He was and still is such a huge inspiration to me that it's really very hard to describe in just a few words all that I learned from him or what he meant to me. Actually, rarely a day goes by when I don't think back to something he once said in a lesson or imagine how he would sound playing a particular phrase. The incomparable sound, that glowing vibrato, that incredible singing quality, and the vivid shapes and colours in his playing. The words that he used to show the shape of the musical phrase to his students. The journeys he took his listeners on, all utterly fabulous. I don't think there are many lessons that I teach these days when I don't quote him or share his various, often very witty texts to help us show the shape of the phrase of the music. He was also widely interested in all kinds of music, in literature, in the visual arts too. His parents were both architects, and from an early age he loved drawing. When he studied in Paris, he sent letters home with the most glorious little illustrations. And my sheet music is filled with funny faces, angry faces, storm clouds, dancing imps, whatever he could sketch in the margin as a little reminder of the music's character. WIBB was a true English eccentric, and we all absolutely adored him. Aside from his outrageously colourful suits, he would sometimes get us barking like a dog to learn how to activate the abdominal muscles, or perhaps teach us how to tune the piano in his teaching room. He often sang and danced to illustrate a musical point in a lesson, and, much to our embarrassment, often got us dancing and singing too. He once came into a lesson after what he'd called a rather boring orchestral rehearsal and asked if I minded if he stood on his head while he listened to the etude I had prepared. He wanted to get the blood flowing to his brain again. WIBB was absolutely unique, like no other person or player that I've ever met. He was genuinely larger than life, and his influence and inspiration will, I'm sure, continue to spread across the flute-playing world and endure for generations to come. The wonderful WIBB. He lives on in all our hearts.
So he had a flute made to his own specific taste in scale.
Well, yes, I think it was something that he spent a long time sort of studying, and and he was friends with Albert Cooper, and just I think he was just fascinated by that, and he had the kind of brain that could cope with that. But even in his teaching, like, there was this absolute insistence on not only good intonation, like really good intonation. I mean, he couldn't stand it if people played out of tune with themselves, but also this idea of having an in-tune tone where the structure of the tone itself is has its full complement of overtones, that it's not sort of slightly above the center and a bit thin and a bit and then a bit edgy, but it's rich. You've got your lower partials in the sound, and you stack it up like a chord. He had brilliant ears, and the way he understood intonation and relative pitch and temper tuning, things like that. But even just within the sound of a single note, that for that to contain multitudes, and for it to for us to hear it sort of like a chord, or to be able to imagine the whole harmonic series, boom, just wrapped up in the richest, most resonant, radiant sound. And I'm so grateful for that, and I remember in my very first lesson, when I grew up in Scotland, I remember my first lesson in London, and when I heard his sound live, it was this tsunami. It was this beautiful tsunami of warmth and radiance and resonance. That's what it was like. I'd never heard, just the sound was just, it felt good in your bones, and that's because it was so the structure of it, the care with which he made that sound and what he listened for. This sounds airy-fairy, but it's what I believe. It's beneficial. Like, that is beneficial to the world to hear a sound so beautiful. And that's everything I try to teach, and everything I try to do is rooted in that. And I would feel like when I listened to him, I felt like it would put the cells of the body back in the right order, or anything that was disordered would come back into order. Just the quality and integrity. I think the integrity of the sound, and also the open-heartedness of it. And that's maybe something helpful to share with people, because I think he was one of the most generous musicians I've ever heard. I mean, he was a generous human being with other people, but as a performer, he was unbelievably generous, because how many of us maybe hedge our bets or defend slightly, or it was absolute open-heartedness and standing in his own power, not in any blustery way, but just in a very, very beautiful way, just somebody taking up their space in the world. And I asked him about it once. I said, Whip, when you walk on stage, because I wanted to understand a little bit more, just so I could help my own students. I said, when you walk on stage, it's also sort of like this immediate, you sense warmth, which is a very beautiful thing. It's not self-regarding. It's not looking for admiration. It's not looking for approval, not looking for praise. It's just very simple. Just this warmth. And so I said, so what goes through your head? I said, that's not nothing. That's not nothing. I mean, that's a conscious, there's an orientation there to what you're doing. And that's what I wanted to ask him about. And he said, well, when I walk on stage, I try to sort of just engage with the audience, like look at people in the eye, and that's so beautiful, because how many of us, are just, we want to kind of forget the audience is there or whatever. Just look them in the eye so that they can relax. How beautiful is that? So they have been acknowledged, the nonverbal language that communicates an enormous amount, right? And then he also said, and then he wasn't a religious man, but he said, and then I say a little prayer. I will do my best, and then I play. I just thought it's so beautiful. It was so beautifully simple too, and it's courageous. It's courageous, and there's also the things I take away from that is that way of orienting towards your audience, towards the situation, to fully accepting, embracing the situation, respecting the people who are there that you're sharing a room with, and also this wonderful self-acceptance. I'll do my best. And so then in an unfettered way, and you just offer what you can offer and get on with it.
Hi everyone, I'm Denis Bouriakov, and just want to share some memories about WIBB. Amy, thank you so much for doing this podcast. I can't wait to hear the whole thing. Of course, I have so many memories of WIBB. I was studying with him for 5 years, and we've been friends until he passed away. So even during the pandemic, we did a couple things online. And of course, we have so many memories and stories. He was such an amazing human being, funny, kind, as they say, larger than life. That definitely, it's definitely about WIBB. So I wanted to share a couple little memories. So first of all, the first time I saw him, I was 17 years old and studying in high school in Russia. Had one more year to go and went to his summer school. To be honest, I didn't know that much about WIBB because in Russia at that time, there were not many recordings available. So I only heard his CD with Bach sonatas and I thought he sounded amazing, but I didn't know much more about him. And I expected, coming from Soviet Russian training, I expected professor to look very serious with a tie, like my professor did. He came to every lesson with a suit and tie. And so I went for the first time abroad alone at this time because even though I've traveled the world already with New Names Foundation and Vladimir Spivakov's foundation, playing concerts as a kid, I never went alone. So this was exciting and a little scary adventure for me because I didn't really speak much English. Even though I took a lot of lessons, it wasn't quite enough to get by, and especially in England where the accent was hard to understand and everything. So I remember I arrived at the train station, and of course I took the wrong train. British system is very complicated, and you sometimes have to take the right car, and I was in the wrong car, so I went the wrong route. And then I realized that I had no cell phone. This was 1999. So I went to a payphone and I called Michi, and I couldn't understand almost anything she was saying. My English was terrible. Anyway, I told them the name of the station I'm at, and they said they will come and pick me up. So I thought some assistant will come, or maybe a friend. But WIBB came himself driving, and this was the first time I met him. So he came to pick me up from the station in the suburbs of London, and he was big and strong and dressed in really bright colors, something I did not anticipate at all. And he took my suitcase from me and carried it to the car, and I was terrified. How can I let Professor carry? So the whole time I was trying to fight this, and I said, no, Professor, I'm sorry. No, I'm going to carry this. Anyway, he put it in the car, drove me to the place, and next day the classes started. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh my God, this will be a long week. I don't understand anything he's saying. It was so complicated for me, trying to figure out the English. And the student kept trying, played over and over, and then finally, this moment I still remember because I had goosebumps. WIBB took out his flute and he demonstrated. So he played whatever phrase he was talking about, and I remember this was like electric shock to me. I was like, oh my God, what was this? I've never in my life heard such a round, beautiful, lush sound as WIBB had. And I'm sure those of you who knew him personally and who have heard him play live will know exactly what I'm talking about, because his recordings are amazing, and that's one thing, but when you hear it live, it was spectacular. The tone he had was just, I think there's no comparison with anybody else. This richness and roundness of it, which was incredible, but never forced. And that's what WIBB was always teaching, how to produce this beautiful singing sound without force. Anyway, so this was my first memory of him, and I, of course, from that moment on, I was completely in love with everything he was saying, and I really wanted to study with him. So during the course, I told him so, that it would be my dream, it would make my life if I could come and study with you. And of course, I was very dramatic, and over the top. And so he said, okay, why don't you apply for the academy and we'll see what we can do. And anyway, we did. in the end, I went to London. I studied with him for 5 years, and there were many, many funny stories. But since it's only a few minutes, I think I want to mention that I owe him also my marriage, because my wife Erin, who also studied with William Bennett, she came to London in 2004 after she graduated from Oberlin with Michel de Bost, and she came to London to study for her postgrad with WIBB. And I heard, oh, there's a new student, Erin. She came from America, Korean, and friends were talking about her, and she heard of me, but we haven't met somehow because she had her lessons when I couldn't make it to hear her lessons. And she was asking WIBB, by the way, I think I would like to do some international competitions. What would you recommend? What do you think? Am I ready? And he said, oh, competitions, you should talk to Denis. And he gave her my number, and she felt very strange why she had to call some random student and ask him about the competitions. So she didn't call. And then next lesson she had, WIBB asked her, so did you call Denis? And she lied, and she said that she did, and that I did not pick up the phone. And he said, well, try again. If you want to talk about competitions, talk to him. So finally she did call me, and it was a very awkward conversation. She said, oh, WIBB gave me a number. He said, I was asking him about competitions, and he said that you've done a few and you could help. So we met in the cafeteria at the academy, and we sat down, and I didn't know what to say and she didn't know what to say. We kind of had this strange talk. But then another friend came by, and sort of things got easier, and gradually we became really good friends, and then we became best friends. And she was dating somebody else, I was dating somebody else. We were never single at the same time, but the beginning of our friendship was because of WIBB. And then in 2007 or so, when I did the Maxence Larieux competition, and WIBB was in the jury, that's when they realized that we are together. And that's around the time we got together with Erin. So they were very pleased, of course. So I owe him not only my musical life, but also my personal life. I wouldn't have met Erin, and my life would turn out completely differently too. But I wanted to also share a funny memory of WIBB. This one time I was in Lithuania with my friend Gedrius and WIBB. So Gedrius organized WIBB some concerts, and one of them we played together. So three of us plus an organ player, because it was in a church and they had no piano. So we sort of rearranged a couple of things and made it work to play with organ. And WIBB, also another thing he liked to do was rehearse a lot and not really look at the time. So if we had a 2-hour rehearsal scheduled, chances were the rehearsal would last for 4 hours, and during that time we would rewrite some parts, we would try various things. It was a never-ending process until the concert started. Sometimes he would finish things right before, sticking parts together and things like that, little bits and pieces in different parts. So we finally finished the rehearsal. It was an 8 o'clock concert, and we finished the rehearsal very late, probably 7:20 or so. And we had to eat dinner because we were starving. So we went to a restaurant nearby. We ordered food and we told them we were in a hurry. But of course, anyway, it took time. And we finished our meal about 7:55. So we get in the car. It was a few-minute drive. And my friend Gedrius is driving, and he starts to freak out a little bit because none of us are dressed. Our instruments are somewhere in backstage. So we have to get dressed, get there. And he said, oh my God, we're late for the concert. And I think by the time we got there, it was already 8:03 or so. I was like, oh my God, we're late. And WIBB stayed very, very calm. And he said, no, we're not late. The concert hasn't started yet. I thought this was so hilarious. He was always really funny, had an amazing sense of humor. I missed him so much. It's such a pity he passed away so soon. We all thought he would be teaching until 95, like Moise. But I guess this is life. Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing everybody's memories and for making this podcast. I cannot wait to hear everybody else's memories, and looking forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.
It didn't matter if he was in front of a major symphony orchestra or the Venezuelan flute orchestra. And I'll never forget being program chair for the 1999 flute convention in Atlanta. And I called WIBB and, of course, Michi. And I called them on their house phone. And I said, hello, it's Amy Porter, and I'm program chair, and I want to know if you can be involved in the Atlanta convention. We're a hub for international flights, and you're one of my choices, along with Peter Lucas Graf. And also, instead of Alain Marion, Tanguy, Jean-Michel Tanguy came. Well, they told me that WIBB was playing a lot with the Venezuelan flute orchestra. And so I was able to create a band that I called WIBB and the Venezuelans. And the amount of heart and soul and laughter and tears that was in the final concert of my convention was overflowing. And it was WIBB and the Venezuelans. They ran the show. I just left it up to WIBB to end my convention. What do you think, Lorna? It was so fun.
I bet they brought the house down.
They did. Here's the other thing. He ended concerto night, and I sat front row for WIBB playing Reinicke with the open G sharp system. Didn't miss a beat. In fact, that was his jam. So I agree. He could light up a room just by his humility. Disarming.
No, I think it's also his connection with the music is so strong. I mean, he's a great musician, and a great artist.
Yeah.
Amy and Lorna, thanks for inviting me to share my memories of WIBB. I remember meeting him for the first time. I was a student at Cheetham School of Music. I must have been about 17. And I got on a train from Manchester and locked myself in the toilets, practicing all the way from Manchester to London. I went in and met this wonderful man for the first time. And I played the first movement of the Ibert concerto to him, and I stopped playing, and there was a kind of gap. And he eventually said, "You sound like a trumpet." I'll never forget that. To tell you the truth, I found WIBB absolutely dazzling, overwhelming. He would have been about 40 when I knew him, in my late teens and early 20s. And he had this feverish, distant, intense look in his eyes that I really found quite disconcerting and overwhelming. And hearing him play during those times, it was just like seeing something impossible being done right in front of your eyes. It was truly overwhelming. And to tell you the truth, for that exact reason, I never really wanted to study with him, because it's like the sun. As beautiful as the sun is, you need to protect yourself from it sometimes. And I felt that studying with him, I would risk wanting to copy him. So I kind of kept my distance from him for many years, although I went to all his concerts and I adored everything he did. I just kept some distance. And in the last months, we did become closer. I saw him several times in this last year before he passed away. And it was very sad to see him so frustrated that he couldn't give what he so wanted to give. But the memories of him in his prime, what he gave, what he represented, that's really what is predominantly in my heart as a memory.
Would he teach through tips, or would he, as we've learned on this podcast, be like Julius Baker and say, play it like this? And then he'd play and you'd be like, okay, I get it. You don't have to say a word. So how was that? What was that like, especially for the French Conservatoire?
I think the biggest influence, honestly, was hearing him play them. He would demonstrate, and and then you'd get it in your ear, and I think that's just so incredibly helpful. I think we learn on multiple different levels. So I think the biggest one for me was just kind of learning by osmosis, like hearing that sound. I would say the most profound lessons that I had with him were on the simplest of melodies. So Marcel Mailly's 24 Easy Melodic Studies. How to play a melody, how to phrase, how to spin the sound, how to use your vibrato intelligently, and how to modulate the energy in the sound with your vibrato speed, with your air, like how you would develop the tone in a phrase, and then how you would build the phrases together. How one phrase would build on what was just said a moment ago. And so that foundation, and then also we did a lot from the tone development through interpretation, the Moyse, because WIBB was a great Marcel Moyse devotee. So in a way, the technique to me, like the technique, in terms of tone and phrasing, was taught more through those little melodies, and then you would apply it to these French pieces. And frankly, that's why he loved, those big operatic fantasies, the Tafnel ones, because they had those very simple melodies in them. I mean, those were also some of the greatest lessons. Like in Freischütz, there's a couple of beautiful slow melodies. That's what I remember most about studying with WIBB, how demanding and how he pushed you to speak through the instrument, and to phrase. Like the worst crime in a lesson would be if you're not saying anything with the music. That would be the worst crime. I mean, he would get mad. He would get angry with that. I would see him in classes just getting angry. Like, that is not music. Like, you're not, what are you doing? So when I think about, the French Conservatoire pieces, so much of it would be to do with what is the tone of voice here?
Okay.
And what is the story you're telling here? So then that would inform what kind of sound you're making, and it's so lovely. It's such a lovely, rich way of thinking. So it's not, there are a multitude of different pianos.
Right.
ways to play piano. Is this a warm piano? Is this a luxurious piano? Does it envelop you in like velvet, or is it very haunting and hollow? And de timbre is the word he would use. Or I mean, he was a very visual person too. So he would think, put some black paint in that, to get the sound a little bit darker and so everything in those pieces was to do with tone color and energy in the sound and telling a story.
Sounds similar to Moïse.
Yeah. Well, I never met Moïse, actually. Did you meet Moïse? Did you ever?
No, but Penny Fisher, she gets stars in her eyes on my Gobert study guide when she talks about meeting Moïse. Her speech slows down and she all of a sudden becomes, like you said, a devotee. It was that way, but flute was life and life was flute. And back then there were no distractions. It was just music and flute.
Hello, Amy. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share some of my memories of WIBB on your podcast. The first time I heard WIBB play in person was when I went to his masterclass in Breckenridge, Colorado in 1985. He played his A to the piano, and I have never ever heard anything like that. His tone was so enormous and expensive. It was like hearing the Grand Canyon in your head. The piece that he played that evening was the Beynon Fantasy. When he got to the cello solo part, it was so beautiful that I got teared up. It was an unforgettable week for me. Next, I have a funny story to share with you. Years ago, on one of my visits to London, WIBB was very concerned about Albert Cooper not getting enough assistance from the local government to help caring for his sick wife. And WIBB was trying to show the local council that Albert couldn't even keep his house clean by bringing a bag of fox poop that he collected from his back garden. Interestingly, I met a few of them, and one of them was named Lucy. Unfortunately, Albert did not get more assistance from the council, but he had to clean up his house all by himself. WIBB was always ready to answer or help anyone with flute problems, no matter how tired he was. It must have been 15 years ago. He came to Toledo to do a flute festival. During that week, I must have said something about my flute being sharp or flat or whatever. One early morning, he got up early and asked to see my flute. He got some paper out, his tuner, a pen, and he started playing my flute and taking notes and writing things down and then took my flute apart. And the next thing I knew, silver dust was coming out of it. He was scraping in some of the tone holes and putting plasticine in some of them, putting my flute back together, playing it, taking notes, writing down measurements, and that went on for hours. And when he was done, my flute was much better, and we even made it back to the festival in time for his afternoon master class. I feel privileged to have known WIBB, and every day I'm still digesting things I learned from him. Thank you very much.
He epitomized the most, in a way, generic sound for the genre he was playing. If you were playing the Baroque Concerto Grosso, then you sounded like this. And then if you were playing the French Conservatoire piece, you're playing like this. He was just, we talk in other podcasts about the musician's musician. He was the flautist's flautist. I think.
Yeah, and I think maybe something else that might be helpful to share is his interest in, and I think for the young flute players who are listening to this, one of the great things about WIBB was his curiosity about music. Just this huge curiosity. So he was forever, listening to great singers. He loved Janet Baker. He would try to copy how she would sing, and he would try to copy things like that. He loved hearing great violinists. So Adolf Busch, who was involved in Marlborough, was colleague of Moisey's. That was one of his favorite violinists, and he would listen. How do they use vibrato? How are they spinning that sound? And part of that integrity in the sound comes from listening to those great non-flute players and somehow incorporating that in. So, for example, for the young flute players who are listening, listen to great string players. If the, often in the flute, the vibrato can just sit on top and be kind of stressful and annoying to listen to. And a great violinist like Augustin Hadlich, the vibrato is going above and below, and so you have a beautiful centered sound. And or think about singers and their resonance. And so WIBB with his tone colors would be trying to emulate singers and violinists. And so I think that was a wonderful example to learn from. I have his book here. If people don't know about this book, this is a beautiful biography that Edward Blakeman wrote along with WIBB. WIBB, A Flute for Life by Edward Blakeman.
Okay, and how many pages is this book?
It's just over 200.
Mm-hmm. And who's the publisher? Where can we get it?
The publisher is Tony Bingham, and they should have it in most flute shops. They certainly will have it in the British ones. So if you can't find it, try Just Flutes in London. Just Google, the name is Just Flutes.
Absolutely.
There's a picture in here that I show my students. It's like the most beautiful hand position, left hand position. It's a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
Look, it's full of these little beautiful cartoons. I mean, he loved doing little doodly drawings like that, and they're hilarious and witty and fun.
He was an illustrator?
Even this image on the front is one of his drawings. Can you see it?
Oh my goodness.
Portrait. And, he loved foxes because foxes, there were some urban foxes that had their home in his back garden in London and Stockwell. And I just love this cat, one of his cats trying to escape the flute sound. So.
And the fox has his ears covered with his paws.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a kind of beautiful, not taking yourself too seriously,
Beautiful humor.
This is Jeff Zook, and thank you, Amy Porter, for having me join this podcast on William Bennett. I became a WIBBite when I was 16 and performed for him at the Detroit Flute Convention for the National Flute Association, and fell in love. I fell in love. He was my hero. From that moment on, I collected his LP recordings and followed him around. I went to the Wild Acres Flute Retreat every summer in high school. There was something about all of us who were WIBBites. We had something in common. Not only a love for the flute, but also we sounded similar. There were some hallmarks of our playing that we all kind of got from WIBB. Um, we followed his guidance on how to make a great sound on the flute. And I remember one person saying once, like, you can tell someone that studies with William Bennett because their intonation is impeccable. And that was the thing that I gained from listening to all the students, was that everyone played really amazingly in tune. He challenged us artistically, and what I really loved about WIB was he never made you feel self-conscious about anything. Of course, you're a little nervous to play for such a great flutist, and he would start by saying things like, "So you played an F sharp instead of an F natural at the top of page 3 of the Poulenc Sonata." He says, "Doesn't matter. You did it with such musicality." And then he'd go on and tell you what he liked about your performance, and always put you at ease before he started the experiments. Like, how can we figure out new colors? How can we figure out new ways of making the sound? And he wasn't afraid of taking risks, helping you take risks as a performer. Go to the very edge. I loved the master classes so much at Wild Acres that I dreamed about studying with him in England one day. And I remember he performed at the Hill Auditorium in Ann Arbor when I was a freshman there. And I remember going backstage to ask him if I could study with him in Freiburg, Germany. I walked into his dressing room and he dropped his trousers. He was changing from his tuxedo into his regular clothes. We had this conversation with his trousers on, which I thought was outrageous. I was, of course, I turned red. But he told me what I needed to do to get into that school. And I couldn't do it. I mean, I couldn't afford what was necessary. But I did study with him subsequently at the Royal Academy of Music in London. And that was a magical year. He helped me become an artist with my flute. I remember one of the things I didn't want to do was take this acting course called the Mastery, and all his students had to take the Mastery. It sounded like a nightmare to me. I was a nerdy little kid from Jackson, Michigan, who was in his little shell, didn't know myself and didn't know how to express myself, but I could play the flute, right? And his wife gave me I said, I can't afford it. His wife gave me a scholarship. He just handed me a check. She's like, here, go take this class called the Mastery. And I was so scared. But I remember coming back, and he looked me in the eyes, and he said, now you know why don't you take that course? And I looked him right in the eyes. I said, I absolutely do. He taught me how to communicate with my flute and with other people. And we also learned about how to become leaders. I remember learning from his wife that she said, a good teacher is a student of their students. We learn from our students, and that's how we communicate. We learn from each other. And I thought, how is this great teacher, this professor at the Royal Academy, saying that she's a student of us, And I learned that when I became a professor myself, that I have to learn from the student as well. And that's when true communication happens. I always loved the way he would say, something about the sound, something about the vibrato. And, he could help us get atmosphere and color in the sound, inspired us all to take new limits and make new sounds on the flute. He was a great teacher and a great inspiration. I have to say that there isn't a flute lesson I don't teach where he's not present in the room with me in some way, shape, or form, or his wife. I mean, that's really where I learned how to play the flute. The classes with Michi were formidable about how to breathe, how to hold the flute. He was gone for my first month at the Royal Academy. We studied with Michi, and I was so disappointed. I spent the first 2 weeks lying on the floor playing diaphragm attacks in a low register, and then I'd stand up and play harmonics. And if they weren't in tune to an nth degree, she would just shake her head. I got to graduate to the Telemann Fantasy, which is if you didn't show clearly the musical phrase, she would just stop you. And she was a taskmaster at a very high level, but what I learned from her was invaluable. But it helped me, be ready to play in the masterclass for her husband, which was, I didn't understand at the time, but it was an amazing gift that he was actually gone for that first month, because I learned some fundamentals that I would have just glossed over because, I could play the Nielsen concerto. What do I need to play whole notes, with my lying on the floor for? I didn't understand. But anyway, those are some of the reminiscences of the William Bennett Flute School and how it affected my life, my teaching, and my playing. Thank you. Cheerio.
Was something that I would really love to share with people that I think is super, super, super important is that taking delight in what you do. And to me, that was like the most beautiful lesson, that I learned from him at the level of the phrase, taking delight in a phrase. I remember lessons on, like, for example, the B minor Bach sonata. And there's one bar where the flute kind of does this beautiful sort of arabesque up. And he just stopped in the lesson. He said, "Isn't that just incredible?" And so that sense of joy and wonder. And I have to say, it's important to, A, never lose that, and B, defend it, I would say. Because it's not an easy profession. And so to me, that is like a little true north right there, that example.
It's not enough to just play the instrument. You have to live the music. And he taught that.
Oh, yes. I mean, the flute is inconsequential. I mean, it's just...
That's right. Yes.
It's the music that's the important bit. And it just, the flute happens to be your medium.
Well, we have covered the spirit of William Bennett, which to me is more important in the legacy he has left since his death. I know there's a book by Roderick Seed.
That's a very nice book about his teaching, about some of the sort of fundamentals of his teaching. When we were talking about the most influential lessons that I remember with him about, the Marcel Moyse Easy Melodic Studies, he was also teaching basic grammar. I mean, when I think about it, that's what he was teaching, like how to phrase, how to play a melody. But there were also specific techniques in that, like how to play repeated notes so that they were beautifully articulated, enunciated, how to play appoggiaturas so that there was the tension and resolution, and that you really had the chops to be able to control that. So it wasn't just something you just think about. You actually had the physical map of how and what you were going for, and the more, the point of emphasis having the most vibrato and the resolution having less. Slowing down, being able to slow down the vibrato on the resolution as you perhaps slow down the air to make a taper. And then these things were actually specific skill sets that help you speak more through the instrument. So it's not just wishful thinking. It's not I'm just going to feel it and emote. No, it's like you would actually have the tools to be able to speak clearly, make the meaning clear. And he also had a way of using the breath that was very vocal too. And he would talk about having a huge range of different types of articulations and different ways of starting notes. He would get very annoyed if you just went all the time. That sometimes you would have this a slower, much gentler release. So it's just an interesting thing when we're trying to build our technique. You want to have clear articulation, but you also want to have such a wide variety. Just as in language, you have all our consonants, some of them are harder than others, or some of them are a little bit gentler. And so all of these things give you ways to speak through the instrument and be articulate. different ways to sort of release the speed of the air too, or this vocal quality I'm thinking about was sometimes like sometimes coming in on a note without any articulation, just coming in right on the breath, and it has a very, very human quality and heartfelt, and like you're just singing on the breath. So things like that. I mean, he did so much instinctively, I think, that it wasn't necessarily like he would spell out physically, this is how you do X, Y, and Z. But these are some of the more specific things that I wanted to share with people.
I'm so glad I just assigned the Moyes 24 melodic studies. So perhaps, the William Bennett legacy has so much Moyes in it that we can turn to listen to WIBB for a lot of this, just music is in the water. Music is, the flute is inconsequential. Exactly. The music is all there is. Bel canto singing, that was also a big Moyes thing. So it's this book, I'm excited to teach in it, because some of these amazing flutists have to come back to remember what the germ of music is.
Yes, and those, I have to say, they look so easy on the page. So for the students listening, do not be fooled. They're like some of the hardest things, like to really do them well, like to really do them, not just to kind of skim over them, but to really do them, like takes an enormous amount of skill and control and listening and attention, and they're beautiful. They're really hard,
Well, we will keep the tradition alive.
Of course, I know.
I see that you were one of his last partners in summer school. Yeah.
Those were really fun times. And I just also want to say, people, know the name of William Bennett, but I just want to also acknowledge Michi as such a, I mean, that their partnership. When I first went to the academy to study, the Royal Academy in London to study, I studied with Michi for my first year. Michi is a fabulous teacher, and it was tough because it was like pure technique for the whole year, but it was really, 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 really wonderful and beneficial. And so the two of them had this have this outlook on life that is so generous and positive, and also full of joy and brightness and life force.
Inclusive.
Yeah.
Very inclusive. Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate it greatly.
Thanks for doing this, Amy. I appreciate being able to talk about WIBB with everyone. So thank you.
Thank you to all the guests for their memories of their beloved teacher. I'd also like to thank WIBB's wife, Michi Bennett. You are so loved by so many and celebrated for your dedication to the flute, to your students, and to the gentleman everyone loved named WIBB. You are constantly in the hearts and minds of all the people that met you both. You can visit WilliamBennettFlute.com for more information. That's William, Bennett, flute.com. You can find me at one of three websites, amyporter.com, or this podcast, PorterFlute.com, or AOS-wellness.com. On social media, I'm PorterFlute and Anatomy of Sound. Thanks for being in PorterFlute Pod. We'll see you next season.